Imagine being the most powerful woman in the world, draped in silk, crowned in gold, seated beside the greatest king on earth, and then, in a single night, being erased. Not killed, not exiled to some distant land, just erased. Your name, your title, your place at the table, gone. Because you said no. This is not a fairy tale. This is not fiction. This happened inside the walls of the Persian Empire, in the court of King Ahasuerus, the most powerful monarch of the ancient world, and it set off a chain of events so dramatic, so terrifying, so breathtaking, that it would determine whether an entire people lived or died. This is the story of Esther, a story about beauty and power, about silence and courage, about a young woman who walked willingly into the most dangerous room in the world and changed history forever. But before we get to Esther, we have to talk about what happened to the queen who came before her. Because this story doesn't begin with a hero. It begins with a king who couldn't handle the word no. The year is somewhere around 480 BC. The Persian Empire stretches from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces under one crown. And King Ahasuerus, known to history as Xerxes the Great, is throwing the party to end all parties. Not a dinner party, not a weekend celebration, a 180-day feast. 6 months. He spent 6 solid months showing off the wealth of his kingdom to every noble, every military commander, every prince in his empire. He wanted them to see the gold. He wanted them to see the power. He wanted them to understand, without any room for doubt, that he was untouchable. And when those 180 days ended, he threw another feast, this one for all the people of the capital city of Susa. 7 more days of wine and music and spectacle. The couches were made of gold and silver. The floor was paved with jewels. The wine flowed in golden cups, and no 2 cups were the same. Every cup was unique, because the king had so much gold he didn't need to repeat himself. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti was hosting her own separate feast for the women of the palace. She was celebrated. She was beautiful. She was powerful in her own right. And then, on the 7th day of the second feast, when the king's heart was merry with wine, when he was drunk, surrounded by cheering men, drunk on both wine and his own ego, he sent 7 royal servants with a message for Queen Vashti. Come, wear your crown. Show yourself to my guests. He wanted to parade her, like a trophy, like another golden cup to show off to his friends. And Queen Vashti said no. The room went silent. The king's face went red. His hands may have trembled, not from sadness, but from something far more dangerous, humiliation, in front of everyone. The most powerful man in the world had just been told no by a woman, and every man in that hall saw it happen. The Bible says his anger burned within him. He immediately called his 7 closest advisors, the wise men who understood law and order, and he asked them a question that tells you everything about his ego. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law? Because she has not obeyed the command of King Ahasuerus. He didn't ask if he was wrong. He didn't consider her side. He asked how to punish her. Legally, officially, permanently. One of his advisors, a man named Memucan, stepped forward with an answer, and the answer was as dramatic as the offense. He said, essentially, this is bigger than the king's bedroom. This is a national crisis. Because if word spreads that the queen refused the king, every wife in Persia will start refusing their husbands. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. So their solution? Strip Vashti of her title. Forever. Remove her from the king's presence. Issue a royal decree, sent across all 127 provinces, written in every language, that every man should be master in his own household. And that's exactly what happened. One brave refusal, And she was gone. The queen's crown was removed. Her name was crossed out of the royal records. And the king's advisors, afraid of the silence that filled the palace halls without a queen, came up with a plan to replace her. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Search every province of the empire. Find the most beautiful young women, virgins, the text specifies. Bring them to the palace in Susa. Place them in the care of a man named Haggai, the keeper of the women, and let the king choose his favorite. It was essentially a kingdom-wide beauty pageant, except the contestants had no choice. When the king's officials came to your village, you didn't decline. You packed your things, you said goodbye to your family, and you were taken to the palace. Some of these women never saw their homes again. And into this sweep of women stepped a girl who would change everything. Her name was Esther. Her Hebrew name was Hadassah. She was young, likely a teenager. She was an orphan. Her mother and father had both died, and she had been raised by her older cousin, a Jewish man named Mordecai, who loved her as his own daughter. Mordecai was no ordinary man. He was a descendant of Kish, from the tribe of Benjamin, the same lineage as King Saul. He worked near the king's gate, which suggests he held some kind of official position. He was educated, careful, and he understood the dangerous world of Persian politics better than most. When Esther was taken to the palace, Mordecai told her one thing above all else. Do not tell anyone you are Jewish. Not out of cowardice, out of survival. The political climate was dangerous. Jewish people were a minority, living under foreign rule, and Mordecai had seen enough of the world to know that their identity could be used against them. So Esther kept her secret close, buried beneath her smile and her grace, hidden inside her heart where no one could see it. Now here is where something remarkable begins to unfold. Esther arrived at the palace with dozens, perhaps hundreds, of other young women. And from the very first moment, Haggai, the king's official who oversaw all of them, favored her. He moved her to the best part of the house. He gave her 7 maids. He gave her the best food, the best beauty treatments, the best position. He fast-tracked her preparation. The text says it plainly. Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. There was something about her that was different. Not just her appearance, though she was described as beautiful in form and appearance. It was something in her character, a quality of presence, a spirit that drew people in. The beauty preparation lasted 12 months. 12 full months of oils and perfumes and treatments. 6 months with oil of myrrh. 6 months with spices and cosmetics. This wasn't vanity. This was preparation for a single night with a king that would determine the rest of their lives. One night, one chance, one audience. Each woman went to the king in the evening. If she pleased him, she might be called again by name. If she didn't, she went to a second house of women, never to return to the first, never to go home, waiting in a kind of beautiful limbo for a name that might never be called. When Esther's turn came, she didn't ask for much. Haggai advised her, and she listened. She didn't try to impress the king with excessive jewels or elaborate clothing. She was simply herself, wise, graceful, and present, and the king loved her above all the other women. The text says he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. He threw another great feast in her honor, the Feast of Esther, and gave gifts generously to all the provinces. A Jewish orphan from a conquered people, a girl with a hidden identity, was now the queen of the most powerful empire on earth. But the danger was only just beginning. While Esther settled into her new life as queen, Mordecai continued his daily habit of walking near the palace gate. The text says he did this to find out how Esther was doing. He couldn't reach her the way he used to. She was a queen now, surrounded by protocol and walls. But he stayed close, the way a father would. And one day, while sitting at the king's gate, Mordecai overheard something that froze his blood. Two of the king's doorkeepers, men named Bigthan and Teresh, were whispering to each other. They were angry, furious actually, and in their fury, they had hatched a plan. They were going to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Mordecai heard every word. He didn't hesitate. He went directly to Queen Esther and told her what he had overheard. And Esther, acting immediately, reported the conspiracy to the king, but she made sure to tell him it came from Mordecai. The matter was investigated. The information was confirmed. The two men were seized, tried, and hanged on a gallows. And the entire event, the plot, the information, the name of the man who uncovered it, was recorded in the royal chronicles. Written down, archived, stored away. It seemed, in that moment, like a small footnote, a near miss, a plot foiled before it could ignite. But that little entry in the royal records, that dusty archive entry with Mordecai's name in it, it would matter more than anyone could imagine at the exact right moment, in the exact right way. First, though, something else was happening. Something dark was rising inside the palace. A new man had entered the king's inner circle, and he was about to change everything. His name was Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. King Ahasuerus had elevated him above all the other nobles, given him a seat of honor that outranked every other official in the empire. And with that elevation came a royal decree. Everyone at the king's gate must bow down to Haman, must prostrate themselves before him, show total deference whenever he passed. Everyone obeyed. Everyone except Mordecai. Day after day, the king's servants at the gate would see Mordecai sitting there, still and unmoved, as Haman swept past. And day after day, they pulled Mordecai aside and asked him, "Why do you transgress the king's command? Why don't you bow?" He told them he was a Jew. The servants reported this to Haman, curious to see what would happen. And when Haman saw for himself, when he passed through the gate, and the one man who refused to show him honor met his eyes with calm, steady defiance, something snapped inside him. But Haman didn't just want Mordecai punished. What kind of satisfaction would that be? One man, one punishment, and it would be over too quickly. No, Haman wanted something much larger, something that would make his name echo through history. He decided to destroy every Jewish person in the entire Persian Empire, not because of a political threat, not because of a military danger, because one man refused to bow. That was it. One act of dignity from one Jewish man, and Haman decided to respond with genocide. He went to the king with a carefully constructed argument. He didn't mention Mordecai by name. He spoke in generalities. There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their customs are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. He suggested they were a problem, a liability, and he offered to personally fund the campaign to eliminate them. 10,000 talents of silver paid into the royal treasury. The king barely looked up. He handed Haman his signet ring, the seal of the empire, and told him to do with the people whatever seemed good to him. Just like that, with barely a thought, with a wave of a hand. Haman called the royal scribes. He dictated letters to every province, in every language, sealed with the king's ring. The letters contained one instruction. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, every Jewish man, woman, and child in the Persian Empire was to be killed, annihilated, their property taken. The date had been chosen by casting lots. The Hebrew word for lots is pur, which is where the holiday Purim gets its name. Haman cast the lot to determine the most auspicious day, and it landed almost a full year away. 11 months. 11 months for an entire people to live with a death sentence hanging over them. The couriers went out riding hard. The decree was posted in the city of Susa. And then the Bible records one of the most chilling details in the entire story. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. The king went back to his wine. Haman raised his cup, and the city, full of people who had just learned that their neighbors, their merchants, their doctors, the families they had known for years, had been sentenced to death, fell into bewildered, terrified confusion. When Mordecai learned what had been decreed, when he understood the full scale of what Haman had done, he tore his clothes apart. He put on sackcloth and covered himself with ashes, the ancient expression of the deepest grief. He walked into the middle of the city and cried out with a loud and bitter cry. In every province, wherever the king's command reached, there was great mourning among the Jewish people, fasting, weeping, lying in sackcloth and ashes. The sound of a people who had just been told they were going to die, and there was nothing they could do about it. Esther's servants and attendants came to her with the news. Mordecai is at the gate, dressed in sackcloth, weeping. She didn't know about the decree yet. She sent him clothes to change into, perhaps trying to get him presentable, trying to help in the only immediate way she could. He refused them. She sent one of her trusted attendants, a man named Hathach, to find out what was wrong. Mordecai told him everything. The decree, the 10,000 talents of silver, the exact wording. He gave Hathach a copy of the written decree to show Esther, to make it real, to make it undeniable. And he sent a message. Go to the king. Beg for mercy. Plead for your people. Esther sent a message back, and what she said reveals the brutal reality of her position. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king in the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. Only if the king holds out his golden scepter may that person live. I have not been called to come to the king for 30 days. Think about what she was saying. She was the queen, the most celebrated woman in the empire. And she was telling her cousin that she could not simply walk into her own husband's throne room without risking immediate execution. The law was absolute. Uninvited visitors to the inner court were killed. The king's golden scepter was the only pardon, and he had to choose to extend it. And she hadn't seen the king in 30 days. A month had passed without a summons. Was he still interested in her? Was he growing distant? She didn't know. Mordecai heard her response and sent back words that have echoed across 3,000 years. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Read that again slowly. Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He wasn't commanding her. He wasn't guilting her. He was offering her a different way to see her entire life. Every loss, every transition, every strange twist of fate that had brought an orphan Jewish girl to the throne of Persia. What if none of it was random? What if she had been placed exactly here, exactly now, for exactly this? Esther was silent for a moment. Then she sent her final message back to Mordecai. Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. If I perish, I perish. 5 words. The most courageous 5 words in the entire story. Not bravado. Not recklessness. She was under no illusion about the risk. She knew exactly what the law said. She knew she might walk into that throne room and never walk out. And she chose to go anyway. 3 days passed. 3 days of fasting and prayer across the Jewish community in Susa. and in the private chambers of the queen. 3 days of preparation that was not physical, but spiritual. 3 days of laying down fear and picking up something heavier and more durable, resolve. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes. This detail matters. She dressed deliberately. She didn't approach the king in mourning clothes. She didn't go in haste or desperation. She dressed in her full royal dignity and walked toward the inner court of the king's palace. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room, opposite the entrance. And when he looked up and saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she found favor in his sight. He held out to her the golden scepter. She was not going to die today. She touched the top of the scepter, the gesture of acceptance, of gratitude, of submission, and the king spoke to her. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." He was pleased to see her. He opened the door wide. And here is where Esther proves that her brilliance went far beyond her beauty. She didn't blurt it out. She didn't say, "Your official Haman is trying to kill all my people, and by the way, I'm Jewish." She had 3 days to think, and she had thought carefully. She knew this king. She knew his ego. She knew that men like Ahasuerus needed to be led to a conclusion rather than hit with one. She invited him to dinner. "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." That's it. Just dinner. Come tonight. Bring Haman. The king was delighted. He immediately sent for Haman. "Hurry, bring Haman so that we may do as Esther has asked." They came. They drank wine together. And the king, warm with wine and feeling generous, asked Esther again, "What is your petition?" "It shall be granted." "What is your request?" "Even to the half of my kingdom." Haman left the first feast on a cloud. He had dined with the king and queen, just the 3 of them. He was the only person in the entire empire that Esther had chosen to invite alongside her husband. His status felt unassailable. He was untouchable. And then he passed through the king's gate. And there was Mordecai, still sitting, still not bowing, still looking at him with that steady, unbowed gaze. And all the joy drained out of Haman like water through a cracked cup. He went home and gathered his wife Zeresh and all his friends together. He told them everything: his wealth, his sons, his promotions, his honor, the feast. He poured it all out. And then he said, "Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." That is the sentence of a man consumed. He had everything: power, money, status, family, favor, and one man's refusal to bow made all of it taste like ash. His wife and friends had a solution: build a gallows 50 cubits high. In the morning, speak to the king and have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go to the feast happy. 50 cubits, about 75 feet tall. This wasn't a practical execution device. This was a monument to his hatred. He wanted Mordecai's death to be visible from across the city. He wanted everyone to see what happened to those who defied him. Haman loved the idea. He had the gallows built immediately. But that night, while Haman was dreaming of the morning, something else was happening on the other side of the palace. The king could not sleep. Here is what the story of Esther is really about. It's about a woman who was born into loss and shaped by uncertainty, an orphan in a foreign empire, raised in hiding, carrying a secret identity. It's about someone who had every reason to stay silent and keep her head down and survive. And instead, she chose to be dangerous. Not reckless, not rash. She was calculated, patient, and strategic. She chose the right moment, the right words, the right table. She walked toward the thing that terrified her most, and she said, in 5 unforgettable words, "If I perish, I perish." The story also holds a warning about Haman, about what happens to a man who can't tolerate dignity in others who cannot bear to see one person refuse to bow. His hatred was so disproportionate, so consuming, that he built a monument to it, a 75-foot gallows, and then died on it himself. He was destroyed by the very structure of his own hatred. And there is Mordecai, steady, watching, believing that the strange path Esther walked was not an accident. Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That question doesn't just belong to Esther. It belongs to every person who looks at their own unexpected, winding, sometimes painful story and wonders why it happened this way. Why here? Why this? Why now? Sometimes, the answer is waiting in the moment when you decide to stop hiding.